The freighter Ash Arrow screamed across a torn nebula as Aria Quinn said, "Hold together, we are not dying nameless." A coded burst cracked the comms, and Mira Salas said, "Listen, this is not a distress call, it is a choice." Juno Cade slammed bulkheads shut and said, "Shields to the nose, ride the shock." Tamsin Rose stared at the alien glyph and said, "I have seen this burn worlds." Pax Elian clutched a datastone and said, "It is singing, Aria, it wants us to hear." A silhouette cut in, and Aiden Varric said, "Turn 3 degrees starboard, or the antimatter vein will peel you." Rook Talon masked panic and said, "Who invited the ghost, navigator?" The anthem of war rose as Cassian Drail said, "Surrender the artifact and live long enough to regret it." Aria Quinn felt the old failure rise and said, "Not again, not today, a line for the corridor and trust me." The Ash Arrow coasted in the corridor's calm as Aria Quinn said, "We live, which means the message wanted us alive." Mira Salas softened her voice and said, "Faith is a skill, not a wish." Juno Cade inspected fractured welds and said, "Hull holds, but pride leaks." Tamsin Rowe traced the glyph and said, "This pattern matches the massacre at Neris Gate." Pax Elian listened and said, "The tone has a second voice hidden under fear." Aiden Varric ghosted the channel and said, "You reached the vein because you trusted the unknown." Rook Talon forced a grin and said, "I call it luck seasoned with terror." Cassian Drail's broadcast returned and said, "Your defiance will be measured in debris." Aria Quinn squared up and said, "Plot a quiet drift. We find friends in the fracture before his net closes." Inside a dim wardroom, Aria Quinn said, "We need an alliance that breathes in shadows." Mira Salas poured bitter tea and said, "People follow warmth more than orders." Juno Cade folded ship schematics and said, "Fuel, munitions, and a miracle." Tamsin Rowe kept to the wall and said, "If the glyph sings again, run." Pax Elian hummed a harmony and said, "It wants to help if we listen." Aiden Varric slipped a data key through static and said, "Meet at Karen's Drift. Come alone but not unguarded." Rook Talon eyed the key and said, "Trap written in elegant fonts." Cassian Drail's patrols flickered on long range and said, "Blockade forms like ice." Aria Quinn breathed past old ghosts and said, "We move before fear decides for us." The Ash Arrow dropped from drift near a graveyard of ships, as Aria Quinn said, "Engines cold, hearts steady." Mira Salas said, "Even ruins remember kindness." Juno Cade said, "Scavengers pinging our bones." Tamsin Rowe said, "The glyph hums when we face the wrecks." Pax Elian said, "The harmony points starboard, gentle like a hand." Aiden Varric said, "You are not alone, watch the shadows for friends." Rook Talon said, "I see tugs with empty flags, which means pirates with manners." Cassian Drail said, "You race ahead, only to meet my waiting fist." Aria Quinn said, "Then we will teach your fist to open." A coded pulse unlocked a hidden bay as Aria Quinn said, "Karen's Drift just answered." Mira Salas said, "Hope travels in disguises." Juno Cade said, "Docking studs align, prepare for a handshake that bites." Tamsin Rose said, "The glyph warms like memory waking." Pax Elian said, "I can sing it open without breaking it." Aiden Varric said, "Proceed, and keep your eyes on the floor, not the stars." Rook Talon said, "Guns on safe, knives not." Cassian Drail said, "You walk into a door, I choose when to close." Aria Quinn said, "Let him watch us build what he cannot command." Karen's Drift woke like a hive as Aria Quinn said, "We barter silence for shelter." Mira Salas lifted a palm and said, "Compassion is our currency." Juno Cade checked vents and said, "Air tastes like knives." Tamsin Rowe touched the glyph and said, "It hums near old scars." Pax Elian leaned closer and said, "There's a hidden rhythm below the engines." Aiden Varric flickered and said, "Dock C will test your resolve." Rook Talon scanned shadows and said, "3 tails, 2 honest, 1 hungry." Cassian Drail prowled the comms and said, "Your refuge is my leash." Aria Quinn steadied the crew and said, "We move as one or not at all." A backroom door sighed as Aria Quinn said, "We came for fuel and truth." Mirasalis poured quiet and said, "Speak without fear." Juno Cade laid out parts and said, "Payment is labor and bite." Tamsin Rowe mapped exits and said, "If it turns we sprint left." Pax Elian tuned the datastone and said, "Another voice waits under the static." Iden Varric fed coordinates and said, "You will choose the darker path." Rook Talon palmed a beacon and said, "Our ride stays warm." Cassian Drail tightened the net and said, "Every whisper is a blade." Aria Quinn bound resolve and said, "We walk into shadows with eyes open." Doc C revealed armored drones as Aria Quinn said, "We test the welcome." Mira Solis steadied breath and said, "Meet metal with mercy." Juno Cade spun a wrench and said, "Mercy carries a fuse." Tamsin Rowe flinched at the glyph and said, "It warns of old fires." Paxelian pressed the tone and said, "Let them hear a kinder code." Iden Varric whispered pathways and said, "Left ladder, narrow boon." Rook Talon baited the drones and said, "I can dance them into a wall." Cassian Drail flooded channels and said, "Yield or be catalogued." Aria Quinn chose motion and said, "We move, we confuse, we pass." The meeting cell stank of ozone as Aria Quinn said, "Name your terms." Mira Solis read intentions and said, "We trade safety for service." Juno Cade counted crates and said, "We can patch your leaks." Tamsin Rowe shivered and said, "The glyph grows warmer near betrayal." Pax Elian held the tone steady and said, "It calms the room." Iden Varric veiled his motive and said, "You seek a chord buried in war." Rook Talon tracked footfalls and said, "4 guards, 2 bored, 2 brittle." Cassian Drail pressed close and said, "Your signatures glow like sparks." Aria Quinn anchored courage and said, "Allies are forged, not found." Sirens climbed the spine of the drift as Aria Quinn said, "Evac paths now." Mira Solis gripped her beads and said, "Hold fast to purpose." Juno Cade killed lights and said, "Stealth buys breath." Tamsin Rowe followed the warming glyph and said, "Left brings less fire." Pax Elian raised the tone and said, "It hides us between beats." Iden Varric guided from static and said, "Trust the dark ladder." Rook Talon slid ahead and said, "I will draw the eye." Cassian Drail sealed rings and said, "Your run ends here." Aria Quinn chose defiance and said, "Then our sprint begins." The engine hums to life as Aria Quinn said, "This corridor is a gamble, but the galaxy won't wait for us." Mira Solis adjusted her robes and said, "There is no luck in this, only the choice to keep moving." Juno Cade checked the diagnostics and said, "Engines are steady, but fuel's running low." Tamsin Rowe eyed the sky and said, "We are crossing a threshold where shadows rule." Pax Elian hummed a strange melody and said, "The song is growing louder. It guides us." Iden Varric watched through the viewport and said, "The drift is the least of your worries. Something is waiting ahead." Rook Talon's hand lingered near a weapon and said, "I don't trust what waits." Cassian Drail's voice crackled through the comm and said, "Move too fast, and I'll mark you." Aria Quinn narrowed her eyes and said, "We move together or not at all." The ship groaned as it broke through the nebula's edge. Aria Quinn said, "We have to trust the path we've set." Mira Solis closed her eyes and said, "Trust is a dangerous word in these skies." Juno Cade gripped the console, her knuckles white, and said, "We're flying blind, no sense of what's ahead." Tamsin Rowe approached the viewport and said, "The stars feel different here." Pax Elian's voice broke through, trembling as he said, "The tone. It's alive." Iden Varric's eyes glowed eerily in the dim light as he said, "The galaxy has forgotten this space, but something remembers." Rook Talon stood firm by the hatch and said, "I can't shake the feeling we're being watched." Cassian Drail's warning came again, "Fate doesn't bend for rebels. It'll break you first." Aria Quinn's determination hardened, and she said, Then we break fate. The ship lurched suddenly as Aria Quinn said, "Brace, we've entered the anomaly's grip." Mira Solis muttered, "A force that pushes beyond the stars. What kind of creature moves like this?" Juno Cade cursed under her breath and said, "We caught in its wake." Tamsin Rowe clenched the edge of the console and said, "This is no natural force. This is something else." Pax Elian trembled, his voice barely a whisper as he said, "I can feel it. It's listening." Iden Varric's voice was cold as he said, "The pull is not a mistake, it's a signal." Rook Talon moved quickly, securing everything loose, and said, "I don't care what it is, we need to get out." Cassian Drail's threat echoed again, "Run from the unknown, and it will run you down." Aria Quinn clenched her fists and said, "We don't run." The anomaly's energy flared, and Aria Quinn shouted, "We need to stabilize or this ship will tear apart." Mira Solis pressed her hands together and said, "We need balance, not force." Juno Cade barked orders, "Engines full, but controlled, don't push us into the heart." Tamsin Rose slammed the comms panel and said, "Can't get a signal from outside, we're isolated." Pax Elian closed his eyes and whispered, "It's still speaking but I can't make sense of it." Iden Varric's voice was razor sharp as he said, "Trust in the void, and it may just answer." Rook Talon cursed and said, "The whole station's locked down, no way out." Cassian Drail's warning echoed one last time, "This is where your journey ends." Aria Quinn set her jaw and said, "No, we force our way through." As the ship stabilized, Aria Quinn said, "We've broken through, but we're not safe yet." Mira Solis smiled faintly and said, "We never were." Juno Cade surveyed the readings and said, "The gravity waves are weakening, but we're still in the shadow." Tamsin Rowe wiped sweat from her brow and said, "I don't trust the quiet." Pax Elian's voice echoed, soft and distant, "It's still out there watching." Iden Varric spoke with finality, "We've crossed into something ancient." Rook Talon pulled up a map and said, "There's a safe spot, but it's a straight shot through pirate territory." Cassian Drail's voice hummed in, "You think you've outrun fate. You haven't." Aria Quinn set her eyes forward and said, "Then we fight fate." The ash arrow slipped into a hidden canyon as Aria Quinn said, "We've reached the safe zone, but we're not alone." Mira Solis stood by the viewport, her expression serene, and said, "We never are." Juno Cade checked the scans and said, "No sign of pursuit, for now." Tamsin Rowe scanned the horizon and said, "But something watches, it always does." Pax Elian clutched the datastone and said, "It's singing again, but it's different." Iden Varric from the corner said, "You've led them into the shadows. Let them think they're safe." Rook Talon peered into the canyon depths and said, "I'll be damned if they aren't waiting in the dark." Cassian Drail's voice cut through the comms with cold precision, "This is where you turn, rebels." Aria Quinn didn't flinch and said, "Then we fight, here and now." The canyon fell silent as Aria Quinn said, "We don't have long, get ready." Mira Solis closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the shift in the air, and said, "The storm isn't just the weather, it's them coming for us." Juno Cade adjusted the weapon systems and said, "I don't care who they are, if they come, they won't leave standing." Tamsin Rowe activated a pulse scanner and said, "No sign yet, but they're close." Pax Elian raised the tone of the datastone and said, "I can feel them coming through, it's like a shadow in my mind." Iden Varric's voice echoed ominously, "They know we're here. The question is, how much are you willing to sacrifice to keep them from finding you?" Rook Talon, always alert, said, "They'll attack soon, but they'll make it look like an accident." Cassian Drail's voice rippled in again, "You're trespassing, and there's always a price to pay for that." Aria Quinn's gaze hardened and she said, "We pay with steel." The sudden crackle of incoming fire broke the silence as Aria Quinn shouted, "Shields up! We're not letting them take us that easily." Mira Solis stepped forward, eyes narrowing, and said, "Shield your hearts, not just your hull." Juno Cade's voice was urgent as she shouted, "Return fire! Hit them first!" Tamsin Rowe braced herself against the ship's bulkhead and said, We've got multiple bogies, evasive maneuvers won't shake them. Pax Alien gripped the datastone tightly, his eyes wide as he said, It's calling to them, it's pulling them in. Iden Varick's voice came through cool and calculated. You should have expected this, but now is too late. Rook Talon activated the defense turrets and said, We're not running. Let's show them how rebels fight. Cassian Drail's voice echoed from the comm, cold and mocking. Your fight won't matter. You're already in my web. Aria Quinn slammed her fist on the console and said, Then we tear it apart. The ship's hull groaned under the constant assault as Aria Quinn said, We're losing shields too fast. Mira Solis's voice was calm, though her face betrayed concern as she said, We're not meant to survive without sacrifice. Juno Cade's voice was full of grit as she shouted, If we don't hit them now, we won't have a chance to fight later. Tamsin Rowe felt the heat rising through the walls and said, Shields are crumbling. I can hear it in the walls. Pax Alien's eyes flickered as he said, They're coming, but not from the ships. It's inside us. Iden Varick moved to the console and said, It's not just the attackers, something is feeding on the ship's energy. Rook Talon, frustrated, said, The damn ship's alive, we're sitting ducks. Cassian Drail's voice came cold through the comms once more. Your failure will be swift, but inevitable. Aria Quinn's voice turned steely as she said, Then we fight with everything we have left. The ship was hanging by a thread, engine sputtering as Aria Quinn said, We've got one shot at this, no room for failure. Mira Solis, standing resolutely, said, Even in the dark light can break through. Juno Cade's voice rang out with determination. If we fail, it'll be a long fall. Tamsin Rowe gripped a rail and said, We fight for the stars, no matter how dark they've gotten. Pax Alien's voice was low, filled with an ancient sadness as he said, I hear them calling again, but I'll not let it take us. Iden Varick's voice carried finality. Your choice now seals the galaxy's fate. Rook Talon turned to Aria and said, It's now or never, Captain. Cassian Drail's voice shattered the silence again. Your rebellion ends here, one way or another. Aria Quinn's voice was fierce as she said, Then we make our end on our terms. The ship was crippled, listing as Aria Quinn said, This is it, no more running. Mira Solis stood at the edge of the cockpit, her eyes closed in meditation, and said, It's never about running, but about standing tall when the storm breaks. Juno Cade checked the engines with urgency. We can still make it if we fire now, but we need more than power. Tamsin Rowe gripped a rail, her voice low. The storm is on us, but we've got to hold them back. Pax Alien's voice broke through, uncertain. I feel it. They're waiting for something, or someone. Iden Varick's voice held a cold, calculated finality as he said, If you do this, there will be no turning back. Rook Talon tightened his grip on the weapon console and said, Let's end this, now. Cassian Drail's voice echoed ominously, I hope you've prepared for what comes next. Aria Quinn set her jaw, eyes locked on the distant horizon and said, We have no choice but to fight. The first shot hit, sending the ship into a violent roll as Aria Quinn shouted, Return fire, all guns, now! Mira Solis's voice was calm but firm, Fire with purpose, or it will only bring us closer to the end. Juno Cade twisted the controls. We're taking hits, but we can still maneuver. Tamsin Rowe, fear flickering in her eyes, said, We won't survive another pass like that. Pax Alien's voice was quiet, almost lost, the tones shifting. It's closer now. Iden Varick's tone was harsh and commanding. They will push you to the edge. Don't let them drag you over. Rook Talon slammed his fist into a console. Not this time. Let's send them to hell first. Cassian Drail's cold laugh crackled through the comms. You can fight, but you will lose. You always do. Aria Quinn's voice was a hard promise. Not today. The ship bucked once more as Juno Cade screamed, Shields down to 30%. We're not going to survive another round. Aria Quinn shouted back, Well, we'll make it. Keep firing. Mira Solis said, The fight is not just against them. It's against everything we fear inside ourselves. Tamsin Rowe adjusted the scanner and said, We're not alone here. There's something else coming. Pax Elian trembled, holding the data stone to his chest and said, "It's calling us all in, it's a trap." Idenvaric's voice was cold and knowing. "You've already walked into it. They're waiting for you to break." Rook Talon gripped the throttle, eyes wide with the adrenaline of the fight. "We're not backing down. Not this time." Cassian Drail's voice echoed in a mocking tone. "You think you're winning? You're already in the trap, fools." Aria Quinn turned to the crew and said, "We fight through the dark, we break it open." The breach alarms blared as Aria Quinn yelled, "Brace! We're losing critical power." Mirasalis, standing at the center of the cockpit, said, "This battle was never about power. It was always about what we're willing to lose." Juno Cade spun her chair around and said, "We need a miracle or we're done." Tamsin Rowe, breathless, said, "We can't afford to lose any more. We have to hold." Pax Elian's voice quivered. "They've found us. It's happening." Idenvaric's voice cut through, hard and cold. "You've been fighting the wrong battle. It's time to face the truth." Rook Talon gripped the gunner's controls with desperation. "We'll see who wins when we break their formation." Cassian Drail's mocking laughter echoed again. "Your rebellion is over, rebels." Aria Quinn, eyes ablaze, said, "Not until the last shot." The battle was over, but the cost of survival weighed heavily on Aria Quinn. The ship was badly damaged, but they had made it through. She stared out the viewport, the silent vacuum of space offering no answers. "We survived," she muttered, almost to herself. Mira Solace, standing beside her, placed a hand on her shoulder, offering comfort. "Survival isn't the end. It's only the beginning," she said, her voice steady and calm. Juno Cade, her face covered in soot, looked up from the control panel, her voice filled with both relief and exhaustion. "We've got the ship patched up, but it won't hold for long. We need a real solution and fast." Tamsin Rowe, standing by the door, muttered, "We've got enemies closing in, but they're not the only ones we need to worry about." Pax Elian, quiet as ever, spoke softly. "The tone, it's fading. They're retreating for now." Idenvaric stood near the back, his cybernetic eye glowing faintly as he observed the crew. "This moment of reprieve is brief. The war is not over. It has just begun in a new form." Rook Talon, standing by the weapons console, tightened his grip on his weapon. "We're alive, but we've made a lot of enemies. What comes next won't be easy." Cassian Drail's voice echoed again through the comms, mocking and confident. "You've delayed the inevitable, but in the end it's all futile. You will fall." Aria Quinn's voice was firm and unwavering. "We're not done yet." The ship limped through the damaged space lanes, every groan of the hull sounding like a death rattle. Aria Quinn said, "We can't run forever." Mira Solace nodded, her voice steady. "No, but running only brings us closer to where we need to be." Juno Cade hunched over the engineering panel. "We've got minimal power, but it's enough to keep moving." Tamsin Rose stared out at the dark void. "Not for long. They'll catch up with us." Pax Elian's voice echoed from behind. Trembling, "It's too quiet. They're waiting." Idenvaric stepped forward, his tone cold and calculating. "You're at the edge. You've reached the point where they'll come for you." Rook Talon stood by the weapons console, his fingers twitching. "They'll come in waves, and we won't survive unless we do something different." Cassian Drail's voice, dripping with menace, came through the comms. "Your escape is temporary rebellion. I will break you." Aria Quinn clenched her fist and said, "We don't break, Cassian. We break you." The ship shuddered as enemy ships closed in. Aria Quinn yelled, "Prepare for impact. Full defense now." Mira Solace stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. "We cannot outrun them. We must stand firm." Juno Cade cursed as the shields failed. "They've breached our defenses. It's going to be a rough ride." Tamsin Rowe gripped the bulkhead tightly. "I don't like this. Something's wrong." Pax Elian, his voice quivering, said, "The data stone. It's reacting. It's calling them here." Idenvaric's voice was devoid of emotion. "This was always the plan, wasn't it?" Rook Talon adjusted his gear, his hands steady as he spoke. "We'll hold the line. We don't let them take us alive." Cassian Drail's mocking voice crackled through the comms. "Foolish. You fight for a cause you can't win. Aria Quinn's eyes burned with defiance as she said, then we'll make them regret it. Aria Quinn steeled herself as the alarms blared louder. They're boarding us, she said, her voice steady. Mirasalis placed a calming hand on her shoulder. We are not outnumbered until we believe we are. Juno Cade's voice was sharp. Brace for impact. They'll breach within minutes. Tamsin Rowe, scanning the walls, said, the breach point is above us. They'll come in through the vent systems. Pax Elian closed his eyes. I hear them. They're close. So close. Iden Varric's voice rang out, cold and decisive. The door will open, but the question is who will stand when it does. Rook Talon stood by the hatch, his face grim. This is it. Make your move, or they'll make it for you. Cassian Drail's voice broke through the comms, dripping with malice. You thought you could win. How foolish. Aria Quinn's eyes locked onto the hatch and said, not foolish enough to stop fighting. The door to the control room blew open, and Aria Quinn shouted, hold the line. Mirasalis stepped forward, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. It's not about holding back, but holding strong. Juno Cade fired. We're outnumbered, but we're not dead yet. Tamsin Rowe fired with precision. This ends when we make it end. Pax Elian whispered, the data stone is fighting them. Iden Varric, moving swiftly, said, it is no longer about escaping. It is about choosing which side of history you want to stand on. Rook Talon swung into position, his eyes steely. Then we fight like hell. Cassian Drail's voice broke through the comms. It's a battle you've already lost. Aria Quinn's voice was full of fire as she said, we haven't lost yet. The ship had made its last jump, but the victory felt hollow. Aria Quinn sat at the helm, eyes burning with exhaustion, her hands still steady on the controls. We've outrun them. For now, she said, her voice low. Mirasalis's calm presence filled the space beside her. Victory is never easy, Aria. You've carried more than anyone should, she replied, her tone soft, yet full of understanding. Juno Cade entered from the back, wiping her brow. The engines are stable, but barely. We've got enough for one more jump, but I don't know if it'll be enough to keep us ahead of the next attack. Tamsin Rowe's voice echoed through the comms, sharp and uneasy. They're still out there. The question is, how much longer can we keep running? Pax Elian, sitting quietly by the communication terminal, muttered, it's not over. The song is growing louder again. I can feel them closing in. Iden Varric's voice was detached, almost eerily calm. It's always been this way. You're caught in a cycle now, a perpetual hunt. Rook Talon spoke up, standing at the weapons station. We can either run, or we can fight. But if we're going to make a stand, it's now or never. Cassian Drail's voice crackled through the comms once more. You've wasted your chance. Your rebellion ends here. Aria Quinn's gaze locked on the viewport ahead, her resolve hardening. Then let's finish this. The ship was a war zone, but Aria Quinn stood firm as the control room erupted into chaos. This is it, she shouted. We make our stand here, or we don't make it out at all. Mirasalis's calm voice broke through the noise. We stand, not for ourselves, but for what we believe in. Juno Cade barked orders. Hold the fire. We can't waste shots. Tamsin Rowe eyed the blast doors. They'll come from the shadows. Stay sharp. Pax Elian's voice trembled with urgency. I feel them. They're close, too close. Iden Varric's tone was calculated. The battle is not just about weapons, but the cost you're willing to bear. Rook Talon's eyes glinted with resolve. I don't care what it costs. I'll make sure they regret ever coming here. Cassian Drail's laugh echoed. You can hold the line, but it won't matter. You're outnumbered. Aria Quinn gripped her weapon and said, then we make it count. The battle was in full swing as Aria Quinn shouted, take them down. Full firepower now. Mirasalis's voice was steady. We're not here to win. We're here to survive. Juno Cade's voice was hard. We hold the line. No retreat, no surrender. Tamsin Rowe fired the last shot from the turret. We'll be surrounded if we don't get a move on. Pax Elian clutched the data stone tightly. It's calling them faster. We need to stop it. Iden Varric's voice was icy. They're closing in, but they're not the real enemy. Rook Talon's face tightened as he targeted another enemy ship. Then let's deal with the ones that are here. Cassian Drail's mocking voice came through the comm. You think you're in control? The real fight begins now. Aria Quinn locked eyes with her crew and said, We finish this now. Aria Quinn felt the ship shudder once more as she shouted, Hold your ground, we can still do this. Mira Solis's voice was low, but steady. The hardest battles are fought in the silence before the storm ends. Juno Cade's voice rang through the comms. We've taken a beating, but we're not finished yet. Tamsin Rowe wiped the sweat from her brow. The enemy is regrouping. We'll have to hit them hard. Pax Elian's voice trembled. It's too late. They're already inside. Aiden Varick's cold voice cut through. They're here for a reason. It's not just about you. Rook Talon prepared for a final assault, then we give them a reason to regret it. Cassian Drail's voice taunted, The battle is already won, rebels. You're just delaying the inevitable. Aria Quinn looked at her crew and said, Then we make the inevitable ours. The ship was falling apart, but Aria Quinn's voice rang out with authority. This isn't over, not while I'm breathing. Mira Solis stepped forward, her voice a calm contrast to the chaos. It never is. Juno Cade's eyes were sharp as she barked, Weapons primed. We're not going down without taking them with us. Tamsin Rowe's voice was steady. We are close, but the real fight is still ahead. Pax Elian, voice filled with fear, said, I can feel it. They're closing in. Aiden Varick's voice was cold. Now the true battle begins, when you realize what's been at stake all along. Rook Talon stepped forward, weapon in hand. Let's end this. Cassian Drail's voice was a dark echo. You can fight all you want. The outcome remains the same. Aria Quinn's defiance flared as she said, We make the outcome ours. The final shots rang out as Aria Quinn stood tall amidst the chaos. We end this now. Mira Solis's voice was a quiet strength. It's not over until we choose it to be. Juno Cade's fierce voice rang out, No more running. This is our victory. Tamsin Rowe fired the last shot. This ends with us standing. Pax Elian whispered, The tone. It's fading. We've won. Aiden Varick's voice was distant. Your victory isn't over until you face the price of it. Rook Talon stood, watching the final moments of the battle. We've taken this fight to them. Cassian Drail's voice. One last time. This battle was always mine to win. Aria Quinn stood firm. And yet, we take it from you.